in the quiet town of Riverton. One child's nightmare was about to begin. The cold wasn't just in the air, it was in the walls, in the floor, in the very silence of the house on Elm Street. Most families were asleep at 3 in the morning, their homes filled with the soft sounds of dreaming. But in the Keller home, the only sounds were the heavy, threatening footsteps of a man and the ragged, frightened breathing of a child. Lily Keller was 9 years old, a small girl with hair the color wheat that fell in tangled strands around a face too pale for someone so young. Her body was thin, almost fragile, and if you looked closely, you could see the faint yellow and purple shadows of old bruises on her arms and legs. Her eyes, a wide and soft blue, had once been full of the kind of wonder that belongs only to children who believe the world is a safe place. But that was a long time ago. Now, those eyes were dull, reflecting only a deep, tired fear. Tonight, they were wide with a fresh, sharp pain as she lay curled on the cold wooden floor of the living room. The air knocked from her lungs. Standing over her was David Kane, her stepfather. He was a man in his early 40s, with a body made strong from years of construction work. His shoulders were broad, his chest solid, and his hands were large and calloused. To the people in Riverton, David was a guy you could call to fix a broken fence or help move a heavy sofa. He had a firm handshake and a loud laugh that he used easily in public. But inside the house on Elm Street, those hands weren't for building. They were for breaking. His boot connected with her side again, a brutal, dull thud that made her whole small body jolt. She tasted the dusty, polished with the floor, and it grounded her for a terrible second. Her thin arms wrapped tighter around herself, a useless shield against the storm of his anger. "Stop your sniveling," David growled, his voice a low, grating sound, roughened by cigarettes and cheap beer. His rage wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a cold, calculated ritual. He was a man filled with bitterness from a life he felt had cheated him, from failed jobs and lost chances. And he poured all that bitterness onto the smallest, most defenseless person in the house, Lily. In the doorway stood Eleanor Keller, Lily's mother. She was a woman in her late 30s who still carried traces of a faded beauty. She had soft, light brown hair and features that could have been kind. In public, she was always put together, wearing neat blouses and a calm smile, the kind of woman neighbors described as so strong and so dependable. But now, in her loosely tied robe, her arms were crossed over her chest, and on her lips was a small, detached smile. That smile hurt Lily more than any kick or punch. She could remember a time when those same lips would kiss her scraped knees, when those hands would gently brush her hair. But that mother was gone, lost to a memory that felt like it belonged to another little girl in another life. The woman in the doorway now was a stranger who watched her daughters suffering and did nothing. Her silence was a betrayal that cut deeper than any bone. "Mom, please," Lily whispered, the words barely escaping her bruised lips. Eleanor's eyes didn't flicker. They remained fixed on the scene, and the faint, upward curve of her mouth told Lily everything she needed to know. There would be no help. Her mother had chosen her husband a long, long time ago. The realization was a final, crushing weight. Lily's body trembled, not just from the pain in her ribs, but from a despair so complete it felt like drowning. She pressed her cheek against the cool, polished wood floor, trying to make herself so small she would simply disappear. Her breaths came in shallow, ragged gasps. David loomed closer, his shadow swallowing her. His face was twisted, a vein pulsing angrily in his neck. "You think anyone is coming for you?" he hissed, his spit spraying hot against her skin. "No one wants you. No one cares." He struck her again, the back of his hand connecting with her cheek. Her vision swam, the ceiling light blurring into a bright, painful halo. In that blur, she saw a ghost, the memory of her real father, Michael Keller. He had been tall and had kind green eyes, and he always smelled of sawdust and soap. He would carry her on his shoulders, and his laughter would fill the house with warmth. He had died in a factory accident when Lily was 6. Since then, the house had grown cold, and Eleanor had married David, bringing a permanent winter into their lives. Another kick landed, and a darkness crept into the edges of her sight. She gasped, her ribs screaming in protest. Her small fingers clawed at the floorboards as if she could dig her way to safety. But no miracle came, only the sound of her mother's robe rustling softly as she shifted her weight, still watching, as if this were a mildly interesting television show and not the destruction of her child. Something inside Lily shattered. Not a bone, but the last fragile piece of hope. She understood, with a clarity that was terrible and absolute, that survival would not come from her mother's mercy. If she wanted to live, she had to save herself. Summoning every last of strength she had left, a strength born of pure animal fear, Lily rolled toward the hallway. Her elbows scraped painfully against the floor, her breath rattling in her chest. The pain was a fire in her side, but the fear was a colder, sharper blade. She dragged herself, inch by agonizing inch, toward the kitchen and the back door that promised escape. Behind her, David cursed, his footsteps thunderous as he came after her. "You don't run from me!" His voice slashed through the air, more dangerous than before. Eleanor took a slight step aside, clearing the path, her robe brushing against Lily's arm as the girl crawled past. For one heartbreaking second, Lily's fingers touched the soft fabric, a final, silent plea for any gesture, any sign of the mother she once knew. But Eleanor shifted away, her faint, chilling smile still in place, as if Lily were nothing more than an inconvenient mess on her clean floor. The kitchen ahead was dark and cold. The linoleum felt like ice under her bare hands and knees as she pulled herself forward. She could hear David's boots behind her, each step a hammer fall coming closer, closer. She reached the laundry room, the final door at the back of the house. A sliver of moonlight outlined its window, a pale promise of the outside world. Her hand found the doorknob. It was stiff, always hard to turn, but desperation gave her a strength she didn't know she possessed. She twisted, lifted, and pulled. The door groaned in protest, then suddenly gave way. A blast of winter air hit her face, sharp and stinging as 1,000 needles. But to Lily, it was the sweetest feeling she'd ever known. It was freedom. She stumbled out into the alley, her bare feet burning with the cold of the asphalt. The night, vast and dark and freezing, wrapped around her. Her lungs felt like they were on fire, her vision swayed, but she forced her legs to move, to carry her away from the house of horrors. Behind her, the door stood half open, a dark mouth inside of the house. For the first time that night, Lily felt a flicker of something other than terror. It was a chance, not because she had been saved, but because she had chosen to save herself. And as she vanished into shadows, the door to the house on Elm Street slowly closed, sealing the silence inside once more. Out there in the frozen dark, someone was already moving toward her. At Bonds Unspoken, we believe every story between a human and their animal companion deserves to be heard. If you agree, please like, share, and subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you can join us every time another bond speaks louder than words. The town of Riverton was buried under a deep, quiet blanket of snow. It drifted down from a black sky, settling on rooftops and streets, muffling the world in silence. The street lamps glowed with weak, hazy halos. On such a night, it felt as if the entire world was holding its breath, asleep under the frozen linen of winter. But on Elm Street, the steady, rhythmic crunch of boots and the soft jingle of a leash broke the stillness. Officer Ben Evans moved through the silent world with familiar, weary pace. He was a man in his early 40s, with the tall, broad-shouldered build of a former athlete that had since solidified into the sturdy frame of a seasoned police officer. His dark hair, cut short, was peppered with early gray at the temples. His eyes, a steady blue, were sharp and observant, but they carried a permanent tiredness, a depth of sorrow that spoke of years spent looking into the darker corners of his community. He had been with the Riverton Police Department for 18 years. The people in town knew him as calm, reliable, and patient, but those who knew him well saw the quiet grief he carried like a weight. His wife, Sarah, had passed away from a sudden illness 5 years ago, and since that day, Ben had buried himself in his work, especially the lonely night shifts. The steady, dependable presence of his partner was the one thing that kept the consuming grief at bay. That partner was Buddy, a 5-year-old German shepherd who walked with a powerful, graceful stride at Ben's side. The dog had a dark saddle of black fur across his back, which contrasted with the warm, lighter brown of his legs and face. His ears were perpetually pitched forward, constantly swiveling to catch every sound, and his intelligent amber eyes missed nothing. He was a large dog, nearly 90 pounds of lean muscle and disciplined energy. Years of intensive training had honed his instincts to a razor's edge, but his most defining trait was an unwavering loyalty. To Ben, Buddy was more than a partner. He was family, a tether to a world that still made sense. The two of them moved in perfect sync, a single unit of purpose in the sleeping town, boots and paws, crunching in rhythm to the fresh snow. They had walked this route 100 times before, but tonight felt different. The air was charged with strange tension, a silent anticipation that both man and dog could feel. It was Buddy who sensed it first. He froze mid-step, his entire body going rigid. His ears snapped forward, focusing on something unseen in the distance, and the muscles along his back and shoulders tensed. A low, guttural growl rumbled deep in his chest, a primal sound of warning that was utterly unlike his usual quiet panting. He strained against the leash, his focus locked on a narrow, pitch-black alley that ran between two aging brick apartment buildings. Ben halted immediately, every one of his own senses snapping to alert. Years of experience had taught him to trust Buddy's instincts without a moment's hesitation. The dog often perceived dangers long before any human could. "What is it, boy?" Ben's voice was a low, steady murmur. Buddy didn't look at him. He gave a sharp, insistent tug on the leash, his nose twitching as he sampled the cold air, pulling decisively toward the dark mouth of the alley. The alley was a tunnel of shadows, the only light a faint, flickering sliver from a faulty street lamp at its far end. It was the kind of place most people would hurry past. Ben's pulse quickened. He unclipped the leash from Buddy's collar, giving the dog the freedom to act. "Lead the way," he murmured, his hand automatically moving to rest on the grip of his heavy flashlight. Buddy surged forward without a sound, his powerful paws throwing up small plumes of snow. Ben followed closely, his own boots making far more noise. The cold bit at his exposed face, but he barely registered it. His entire world had narrowed to the alley, the dog, and the unknown. Buddy's low growl had softened now into a high-pitched, urgent whine, a sound that quickened Ben's steps and tightened the knot of apprehension in his stomach. Then they saw her. A small, huddled shape was crumpled against the grimy brick wall, half buried in a drift of snow that had gathered in the lee of the building. It was so still that for a heart-stopping second, Ben thought it might be a discarded bundle of rags. But then he saw the faint, violent shivering. It was a child, a little girl, wearing a thin, torn nightgown that was once pale yellow, but was now stained with dirt and something darker. Her bare legs were curled beneath her, the skin mottled a frightening blue and white from the cold. Her hair, a light blonde, was matted with sweat and frozen tears, and at the corner of her mouth, a smear of crimson glistened wetly in the weak light. Ben's heart clenched so violently it felt like a physical blow. He dropped to his knees in the snow beside her, his professional composure cracking for a single, raw moment. Up close, the details were even more horrifying. He could see the ugly, fresh bruises blooming across her arms and shoulders. He could hear the jagged, rattling sound of her breathing. Each gasp a struggle. She was so thin, so painfully small. Her lips moved, trembling with a huge effort. Her eyes, a wide, stormy gray that seemed far too old for her face, fluttered open and locked onto his. There was no childhood innocence in that gaze, only a bottomless animal terror. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking like thin ice. Don't let him find me." In that moment, Ben felt the full, crushing weight of her plea settle deep into his bones. This wasn't just simple fear. It was a terror so profound it had been carved into her very soul. Whoever he was, Ben knew with a cold, certain fury that this child had been running from a monster. He gently pressed a hand to her shoulder, careful not to jar her injuries. "You're safe now," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I promise. You're safe." Buddy, sensing the shift, let out a soft, worried whine. The great dog lowered his body to the frozen ground, ignoring the cold, and pressed a warm, solid length of his torso against the girl's shivering side. Her trembling fingers, small and pale, reached out instinctively and buried themselves in the thick fur of his neck, gripping it like a lifeline. For the first time since they found her, her ragged breathing seemed to ease, if only for a single, shuddering breath. Ben didn't waste another second. He pulled his radio from his belt, his voice clipped and professional, betraying none of the rage and sorrow churning inside him. "Dispatch, this is Officer Evans. I need an ambulance at the alley between 7th and Elm, behind the old grocery warehouse. Pediatric female, approximately 8 to 10 years old, hypothermic, multiple visible injuries, suspected internal trauma. Immediate transport required." The reply crackled back instantly. "Asterisk, copy that, Officer Evans. EMS is en route. ETA 5 minutes. Asterisk." The snow began to fall heavier now, large, lazy flakes that landed on Ben's jacket and melted into the dark fabric. He barely noticed. His entire focus was on the child. His jaw tightened until it ached. He had seen neglect in his career. He had seen bruises. But something about this, the sheer visceral terror in her whisper, cut him deeper than anything before. "Stay with me, sweetheart," he murmured, leaning closer to her. "Help is coming. Just hold on." The little girl, Lily, though he didn't know her name yet, only clung tighter to Buddy, her face half buried in the comforting warmth of his fur. The dog stayed perfectly, wonderfully still, letting her hold on as long as she needed. His ears twitched at every distant sound, but his amber eyes never left the girl's face, a silent, furry guardian in the frozen dark. And then the beautiful, welcome sound they were waiting for. The distant wail of a siren broke the night's deep silence. It grew louder, closer, until finally red and blue lights painted the alley walls in swirling, urgent colors. The ambulance screeched to a halt at the curb, its doors flying open almost before it had fully stopped. Sirens tore through the night, a sound that finally meant hope. The arrival of the ambulance was a burst of controlled chaos into the frozen stillness of the alley. The vehicle's headlights cut bright sways through the darkness, its engine a loud, rumbling heartbeat that promised action, help, a chance. The rear doors flew open, and 2 paramedics emerged, their movements swift and efficient. The first was Maria Flores, a woman in her late 20s with a petite frame that belied a formidable strength. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, practical bun. Her eyes, a sharp, intelligent brown, scanned the scene, instantly taking the police officer, the large German shepherd, in the small, huddled form on the ground. Despite her youth, Maria carried a calm, focused authority that came from years of working emergency medical services. Her partner, Frank Dobson, was a stark contrast. In his mid-50s, he had a weathered, lined face and a head of thick, silver hair barely contained under a beanie. A bushy, salt and pepper mustache dominated his upper lip, giving him a gruff appearance that melted away the moment he spoke. He had been a paramedic for over 3 decades, and his hands, now pulling the stretcher from the back of the ambulance, were steady and sure. Together, they moved with a seamless, practiced rhythm. Maria knelt in the snow beside Lily, her gloved hands moving with a gentle precision. "Sweetheart, can you hear me?" she said, her voice soft but clear, cutting to the girl's haze of pain and fear. Lily flinched at the new voice, a fresh wave of terror seizing her. Her grip on Buddy's fur tightened, her knuckles turning white. But the German shepherd, sensing the newcomers were there to help, gave a soft, reassuring nudge with his wet nose against her cheek. It was a small gesture, but it was enough. Lily's eyes, wide and terrified, fluttered open to look at Maria. Frank had the stretcher unfolded and ready. He took in the girl's condition at a glance, his experienced eyes noting the hypothermia, the unnatural angle of her breathing, the bruising. Hypothermic. Possible rib fractures, maybe internal bleeding, he stated, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "We need to move fast." Officer Evans moved to help, his large frame surprisingly tender as he assisted in the delicate process of lifting Lily onto the rigid board. She whimpered as they moved her, a tiny, broken sound that was nearly lost in the wind, but it echoed loudly in Ben's heart. "It's okay, you're okay," Maria murmured, her words a constant, soothing stream as they secured Lily to board and then lifted her onto the wheeled stretcher. "We've got you now. You're so brave." Ben helped him with a stretcher over the uneven ground toward the ambulance. Buddy trotted alongside, his body a protective barrier between the girl and the world, his gaze never leaving her pale face. Inside the ambulance, it was a world of light and organized purpose. Maria and Frank worked quickly as a team, wrapping Lily in thick, warm blankets, starting oxygen mask and attaching monitors. The electronic beeps began a new, clinical rhythm in the small space. Ben climbed into the ambulance after them, his presence filling the remaining space. Without a moment's hesitation, Buddy leapt gracefully up and inside, settling himself on the floor directly next to the stretcher, his body pressed against it. Frank opened his mouth, a protocol about animals and ambulances likely on his lips, but he stopped. He saw the way the little girl's hand immediately snaked out from under the blankets to clutch the dog's fur again, her breathing calming slightly at the contact. He simply shook his head, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his eyes behind his glasses. "Guess he's part of the medical team tonight," Frank grunted, closing the ambulance doors and sealing them inside. The vehicle roared to life, its siren piercing the night once more as it pulled away from the curb. The sudden movement and the wail of the siren made Lily whimper again, her eyes darting nervously around the bright, confined space. "He'll find me," she whispered, the words muffled by the oxygen mask but chillingly clear. "He always finds me." Ben leaned forward, his face close to hers, making sure she could see his eyes, could see the certainty in them. He needed her to believe him. "No one is going to hurt you again," he said, his voice firm and steady, a rock in her swirling storm of fear. "Not while I'm here." He then glanced down at Buddy, whose head was resting protectively on the stretcher beside Lily's hip. "And not while he's here, either." The dog's intelligent amber eyes lifted to meet Ben's for a moment, and the officer felt a strange, unshakable conviction that the animal understood every word. There was a silent pact forming in the humming interior of the speeding ambulance, a bond between a broken child, a steadfast officer, and a loyal dog. For the next 10 minutes, the world outside ceased to exist. There was only the hum of the engine, the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor, the hiss of oxygen, and the small, shivering figure of a child clinging to a dog as if he were the last solid thing in a universe that had betrayed her. Maria and Frank worked efficiently, their voices a low, professional exchange, but Ben's attention was fixed entirely on Lily. He watched as, slowly, the terror in her gray eyes began to be edged out by sheer exhaustion. The warmth of the blankets, the steady presence of the dog, the calm assurance of the adults. It was all working to loosen the grip of immediate panic. And then a small miracle happened. Lily's eyes, heavy-lidded and bruised from tears and lack of sleep, drifted closed. It wasn't the tense, fearful closing of someone hiding from the world, but the slow, weary surrender of a body that finally, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, felt safe enough to rest. Her fingers remained tangled in Buddy's fur, her knuckles slowly relaxing their desperate grip. She slept at last, her fingers still tangled in Buddy's fur. Ben let out a breath. He didn't realize he'd been holding. She was sleeping. She trusted them enough, trusted Buddy enough, to sleep. In that moment, watching the slow, even rise and fall of her chest under blanket, Ben Evans felt a resolve crystallize within him, as hard and cold as the winter night outside. This wasn't just another case. This was personal now. He would find the monster who did this, and he would make sure that Lily's whispered fear, "He always finds me," would never, ever come true again. The ambulance raced on, a tiny capsule of fragile hope, speeding through the dark, carrying its precious cargo toward the bright lights of Riverton General Hospital. But safety was only temporary. The ambulance's arrival at Riverton General Hospital was a stark transition from the dark, chaotic night to a world of blinding, sterile brightness. The automatic doors hissed open, swallowing the vehicle's cargo into the warm, antiseptic-scented lobby. The fluorescent lights overhead cast a harsh, unflinching glow on everything. The air buzzed with a low hum of quiet urgency, the squeak of shoes on linoleum, the distant pages over the intercom. A woman was waiting for them at the entrance to the emergency ward. This was Dr. Anna Flores, the attending pediatrician on call. She was in her late 40s, tall and lean, with a graceful intensity to her movements. Streaks of silver highlighted her dark hair, which was pulled back into a no-nonsense ponytail. Her face was etched with fine lines of countless long nights, but her hazel eyes held a fierce, unwavering focus. She had dedicated her life to pediatrics after a childhood illness nearly took her younger sister. The experience had planted a deep, personal vow in her heart. No child in her care would ever be invisible or unheard. 10 years old, hypothermic, multiple bruises, suspected broken ribs. Maria Flores recited briskly as they wheeled a gurney down the hallway. Dr. Flores nodded, already pulling on a pair of blue latex gloves with a snap. Her eyes quickly assessed the small form on the stretcher, taking in the pallor, the bruising, the way the child's thin hands were desperately fisted in the fur of the massive German shepherd walking steadfastly beside her. The sight of the animal in her hospital was highly irregular, but one look at the connection between the dog and the girl silenced any instinct to object. Inside the examination room, a space of soft lighting designed to calm, Lily was transferred with immense care to a padded examination bed. She whimpered as she was moved, and her hands immediately sought out Buddy again. The dog, without being commanded, settled his bulk on the floor beside the bed, laying his head heavily on the mattress right next to her hip. Dr. Flores approached slowly, lower in her height, so she wasn't looming. "Sweetheart, my name is Dr. Anna," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You are in the hospital now. You are safe here. I promise you. I just need to check where you're hurting, okay? Can you be brave for me?" Lily's wide, gray eyes flickered over the doctor's face, filled with a terror that was heartbreaking to witness. But then she felt Buddy's warm, wet nose nudge her hand. She looked at the dog, and some of the tension seeped from her small shoulders. She gave the faintest, almost imperceptible nod. The examination that followed was a silent, grim ritual. Dr. Flores's hands were gentle but thorough. As she lifted the hospital gown, the full map of Lily's suffering was revealed under the bright exam light. The bruises were not random. They were a chronicle of abuse. Some were a sickly yellow-green, days old. Others were a livid, fresh purple and blue. Along her rib cage, a specific, angry swelling made the doctor's lips press into a thin line. One rib was clearly broken. When she gently pressed Lily's stomach, she felt the telltale hollow tightness of a child who had gone hungry too many times. Each bruise told its own story of pain. Dr. Flores straightened up slowly, her jaw tightening. She had seen neglect, she had seen accidents, but this was a deliberate, systematic breaking of a child. A cold fury settled in her stomach, but she kept her expression neutral for the sake of the girl on the bed. Officer Ben Evans stood near the door, his police jacket looking out of place in the soft room. He had removed his cap, and one hand was unconsciously stroking Buddy's back. His tall frame seemed to absorb the space, his presence a silent, angry storm contained by sheer willpower. His blue eyes, fixed on Lily, held a mixture of profound sorrow and a tightly leashed rage. Every bruise the doctor uncovered felt like a personal failure. When Dr. Flores finished, she stepped away from the bed, motioning for Ben to join her in a corner, out of Lily's immediate earshot. "She suffered repeated trauma," the doctor said, her voice low and tight. "The broken rib is new, but the other bruises, they're in various stages of healing. She's badly underweight. This child has been living in a sustained hell." Ben's jaw flexed, the muscle twitching. He gave a single, sharp nod. "I need to hear it from her. I need her statement." His voice was gravelly with suppressed emotion. Dr. Flores placed a hand briefly on his arm, her touch of physician's calm restraint. "Don't push too hard. She'll tell you when she's ready." Her eyes flicked toward Buddy. "And don't you dare move that dog. He's doing more for her right now than any medicine I could give." A faint, grim smile touched Ben's lips. "I wasn't planning on it." When Dr. Flores left to order x-rays and blood tests, the room settled into a heavy quiet. Lily sat curled on the bed, the hospital gown swallowing her small frame. She looked tiny and lost amidst the wires and crisp sheets. Buddy shifted his weight, letting out a soft sigh, and rested his heavy head more fully on her lap. She began to stroke his fur with trembling fingers, and with each pass, her breathing seemed to grow a little more even. Ben moved closer, pulling up a stool so he wouldn't tower over her. He sat, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees, making himself as small and non-threatening as possible. "Lily," he began, his voice a low, warm rumble. "My name is Ben Evans. I'm a police officer. You're safe here. No one is going to hurt you tonight." He let the words hang in the air, a simple, solid promise. Her lips trembled. Fresh tears welled in her eyes. For a long moment, she said nothing, just buried her face in the thick, warm fur of Buddy's neck. The dog remained a statue of comfort. Finally, a tiny, broken sound escaped her. It was more a sob than a word. Then she tried again, her voice cracking. He hits me." The words were so small, yet they seemed to suck all the air from the room. They carried a weight of truth that was absolute and devastating. Ben kept his tone steady, a calm harbor in her storm. He didn't push, he simply waited. "Who hit you, Lily?" She swallowed hard, a painful-looking gulp. "David, my stepdad." The name was a poison on her tongue. Ben's stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. He had expected it, but hearing the name from her, spoken with such raw terror, made the abstract horror violently real. Lily's tears began to fall in earnest now, dripping onto Buddy's fur. Her small hands gripped his ears like they were lifelines. "He locks me in the basement when he gets mad," she hiccuped between sobs. "Sometimes for days. No food, just water." A full-body shudder racked her frame. He said if I told anyone, he'd make sure I never came out again." Ben's fist clenched where it rested on his knee, his knuckles turning white. He forced his voice to remain a soft, steady anchor. "And your mom, Lily? Did she know?" Lily's eyes, gray and clouded with despair no child should ever know, lifted from the dog's fur and met his. The look in them was one of utter desolation. She watched. The words were a whisper, but they echoed in the silent room. She just stood there. She smiled. Her voice broke on the last word, and the sound was like shattering glass. Her words broke more than the silence. They broke the case wide open. For a long moment after Lily's whisper faded, the only sound in the hospital room was a steady, electronic beep of the heart monitor and the girl's ragged, hitching sobs. The words, she smiled, hung in the antiseptic air, a toxic cloud. Officer Ben Evans felt a cold, clean fury wash through him, so potent it was a physical taste in his mouth, like iron and ice. It was one thing for a monster to exist in a child's life. It was another thing entirely for the person who was supposed to be a sanctuary to become a willing spectator to the horror. He did not let this rage show. He could not. For Lily, his face had to remain a mask of calm strength. Inside, however, a vow was being forged in fire. He looked at this small, broken child, her face buried in the fur of the only being who would offer her unconditional protection, and he knew this case would define the rest of his career. It had ceased to be a job. He slowly unclenched his fist, forcing his breathing to remain even. He reached out, not to touch her, but to place his large, steady hand palm up on the bed, an offering, a symbol of his presence mere inches from her own trembling fingers. "I believe you, Lily," he said, his voice low and resolute, each word a brick being laid in a foundation of trust. "I believe every word you are saying." Her sobs softened into whimpers, the storm of her tears beginning to subside into exhausted tremors. Buddy, sensing the shift, let out a soft, empathetic whine and pressed the full weight of his body more firmly against the side of the bed, against her legs. It was as if the dog were trying to physically shield her from the memory itself. Ben leaned forward slightly, his blue eyes locked on her downcast face. "Listen to me, Lily," he said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "You will not go back there. Do you hear me? You will never, ever have to face him again. I promise you. You are safe now." It was a promise he had no legal right to make outright, but in his heart, he knew it was a truth he would enforce with every fiber of his being. Lily's breathing began to even out, matching the slow, rhythmic pattern of the dog's breathing beside her. She leaned more heavily against Buddy, her small body seeming to draw strength from solidity. The terror in her eyes was gradually being replaced by profound, bone-deep exhaustion. The adrenaline that had fueled her escape, the fear that had kept her awake through the examination, was finally receding, leaving her utterly spent. Ben sat quietly by her side, a silent sentinel, as her eyelids grew heavy. She fought it for a moment, her fingers still twitching in Buddy's fur, but eventually sleep, a true, deep, and merciful sleep, claimed her. Her body went limp, her head resting fully against the dog, her breath evening out into a soft, regular pattern. For the first time since he had found her in that snow-drifted alley, she looked like what she was, a child, not a victim. Ben did not move. He remained on the stool, watching over her, while Buddy maintained his vigil, a furry guardian angel who hadn't budged an inch. The dog's amber eyes met Ben's, and in that silent exchange the pact was sealed. They were in this together. For her. It was another hour before Dr. Flores returned, her footsteps quiet on the tile floor. She glanced at the sleeping child, then at the officer and the dog, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. The X-rays confirmed the broken rib, she reported softly, holding a clipboard. No signs of internal bleeding, which is a miracle given the bruising. The blood work shows she's very underweight. We'll keep her hydrated and start her on a careful nutritional plan. Social services has been notified. They'll be here in the morning. Ben nodded, finally rising from the stool, his body stiff from holding the same position for so long. She talked, he said, his voice hushed. She named her stepfather, David Kane. She said he locked her in the basement for days. And she confirmed her mother, Eleanor, was not just aware, she was complicit. She watched and smiled. Dr. Flores's face hardened, her professional composure cracking for a second to reveal the disgust beneath. I'll document everything. The photos of the bruises, the medical report, it will all be here for you. She looked at the sleeping girl. Where will she go? For now, a foster placement. I'll personally vet it, Ben said, his tone leaving no room for argument. But first, I have a search warrant to execute. He moved to leave, but paused, looking at Buddy. The dog looked back, then at Lily, and made a small, uncertain movement as if torn between his duty to his partner and his new, self-appointed duty to the child. Stay, Buddy, Ben commanded softly. Guard. The dog immediately settled back down, his head resting on the mattress, his eyes fixed on Lily's sleeping face. He would not move until Ben returned. Leaving the hospital, Ben felt the quiet of the night settle around him again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It was a silence before the storm. The first hints of dawn were a pale, gray smear on the horizon as he drove back to the precinct, the image of Lily's broken body, and the sound of her whispered confession playing on a loop in his mind. He used that fury, that heartbreak, to fuel the meticulous process of preparing the raid. By the time the sun had fully risen, casting a cold, clear light over Riverton, Ben had assembled his team. The search warrant, signed by a grim-faced judge, was burning a hole in his pocket. He stood before two other officers, his expression granite. This isn't a routine call, he told them, his voice low and serious. We're going to the residence of David and Eleanor Kane on Elm Street. We have reason to believe a child, Lily Keller, was subjected to prolonged and severe abuse and unlawful imprisonment there. We are looking for evidence, a basement room, restraints, anything that can corroborate her statement. Expect hostility. The stepfather is described as large and aggressive, and the mother is complicit. The officers nodded, their faces set in grim lines. Let's go, Ben said, turning toward the door. As they stepped out into the crisp morning air, Ben's radio crackled. It was a front desk. Evans, you're K. 9 is causing a fuss at the hospital, whining by the door. They think he wants to find you. A faint, hard smile touched Ben's lips. Buddy hadn't broken his command to guard, but he was telling them he was needed. He knew. He always knew. Tell them I'm on my way to pick him up, Ben replied. This is one search he needs to be on. The pieces were moving now. The child was safe for the moment. The truth was out. Now, it was time to go into the dragon's den and get the proof. A low, restless whine from the hospital miles away seemed to echo the thought. Justice was stirring. Judge Harold Miller read the preliminary report in silence, his eyes moving slowly down each page in his wood-paneled office. The only sound was the gentle ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. He was a man in his 60s, with a full head of white hair and a face permanently etched with the weight of his decisions. He was known for being fair but uncompromising, especially in cases involving the vulnerable. When he finished, he looked first at Ben Evans, then at Detective Lisa Perez. His gaze was somber. This child's statement is remarkably specific. The medical evidence supports it. He picked up his pen. You know what you're walking into. Officer Evans, a man capable of this. He doesn't give up his secrets easily, and a mother who condones it. He let the sentence hang, shaking his head slightly as he scrawled his signature at the bottom of the search warrant with a firm, decisive stroke. Be ready for it, and be careful. We will, Your Honor, Ben said, taking the signed document. It felt like holding a key to a house of horrors. Back at the precinct, Ben assembled the team in a briefing room. Beside Detective Perez, there was Officer Jake Garcia, the young, sharp-eyed patrol officer, and a few other uniformed officers chosen for their steadiness. Ben stood before them, the warrant in his hand. We are executing a search warrant at 124 Elm Street, he began, his voice flat and professional, belying the storm inside him. The residents are David and Eleanor Kane. We are investigating the severe and prolonged abuse of a minor, Lily Keller. The suspect, David Kane, is described as physically imposing, aggressive, and likely to be confrontational. The mother, Eleanor Keller, is considered complicit. The primary target is a basement room the victim described as her place of imprisonment. We are looking for physical restraints, weapons, the child's personal items, anything that proves her story. This is a high-stress situation. Everyone stays alert. He didn't need to dramatize it. The facts in the report were dramatic enough. A grim determination settled over the room. It was then that Ben's personal phone buzzed. It was a nurse from the hospital. Officer Evans? It's about Buddy. He's been perfectly calm with Lily, but the moment she fell into a deep sleep, he started getting restless. He's been whining at the door for the last 10 minutes. He seems intent. A cold certainty settled in Ben's gut. He hadn't even needed to ask. I'm on my way to get him, he said. He's part of the team. When Ben arrived at the hospital, Buddy was waiting just inside the main doors, his leash held by a kindly nurse. The moment he saw Ben, the dog's entire body relaxed, then tensed again with new, focused energy. His tail gave a single, sharp wag, but his eyes were all business. He nudged Ben's hand with his nose as if to say, What took you so long? We have work to do. Ben clipped the leash on. Ready to go to work, boy, he murmured. Buddy responded with a low woof, pulling gently toward the door. Even the dog could sense justice stirring. Back at the precinct parking lot, the team was ready. 2 squad cars and an unmarked sedan. As Ben approached with Buddy, the German shepherd's demeanor changed. His ears pricked forward, his nose twitched, and a low, rumbling growl started deep in his chest. He was already on the hunt, his instincts syncing with the mission before they'd even left the lot. Detective Perez raised an eyebrow. He knows. He always knows, Ben replied, opening the back door of his car for Buddy. The dog leapt in and sat perfectly straight, his amber eyes fixed ahead, looking through the windshield as if he could already see the house on Elm Street. As the small convoy pulled out, cutting to the bright, cold morning, the mood inside the vehicles was tense and silent. There were no jokes, no casual talk. Each officer was mentally preparing for what they might find, for the confrontation ahead. Ben drove, his hands tight on the wheel, the signed warrant on the passenger seat. In the rear-view mirror, he could see Buddy, a statue of canine intensity. They were no longer just police officers going to search a house. They were a force moving toward reckoning. They were going to tear the mask off the ordinary house on Elm Street and expose the rotten truth festering within its walls. For Lily, by dawn, the hunt would begin. The police cars rolled to a quiet stop a few houses down from 124 Elm Street, their engines cut out. The neighborhood was waking up. A curtain twitched across the street. The house itself looked peaceful, neatly painted siding. A recently shoveled driveway, a porch with a welcoming swing. It was the picture of suburban normalcy. A carefully maintained mask that made Ben's skin crawl. He stepped out of the car, the cold morning air sharp in his lungs. Buddy leapt out after him, instantly alert. The German shepherd stood rigid at Ben's side. His entire body was a coiled spring of tension. His nose lifted, sampling the air. A deep, continuous growl rumbled in his chest. His eyes were fixed on the front door, his hackles raised along his back. He was looking at the house and seeing not a home, but a threat. "He knows," Detective Perez murmured, coming to stand beside Ben. "He always knows," Ben replied, his voice tight. He unclipped Buddy's leash. The dog needed to be free to react. The team moved up the walkway in a tight formation. Their boots crunched on the icy path. Ben took the lead, the search warrant held firmly in one hand. He could feel his heart pounding. A steady, heavy drumbeat of adrenaline and anger. This was it. He knocked on the door. Not a polite tap. 3 firm, authoritative thuds that echoed in the quiet morning. For a moment, nothing. Then, the sound of heavy, approaching footsteps. The door was wrenched open. David Kane filled the frame. He was exactly as Lily had described. A big man, broad-shouldered and thick-chested. Cold, flinty eyes. He wore a stretched-out sweatshirt and jeans. He radiated hostility. "What the hell is this?" David barked. He didn't sound surprised. He sounded annoyed. "You've got no right to be on my property." Ben held up the warrant. "We have a search warrant, Mr. Kane." "Step aside." David's eyes narrowed. His hands clenched into fists. He didn't move. "A warrant for what?" "This is my house. You can't just barge in here." Behind him, Eleanor Keller appeared. She was dressed in a neat, cream-colored sweater. Her hair was softly styled. She looked the part of a concerned, respectable homemaker. "David, what's going on?" Her voice was light, almost pleasant, but her eyes were calculating and cold. Ben's gaze didn't waver from David. "We're here to search the premises. Now, for the last time, step aside." "This is bull." David spat, his face flushing with anger. He took a half step forward, blocking the doorway. Detective Perez moved forward. Her voice cut through the tension. "It's not a request, Mr. Kane. This is a court order. Move, or we will move you." The threat hung in the air. David's jaw worked. His body trembled with rage. He looked from Ben's stony face to Perez's unwavering stare. He saw the other officers, hands ready. He saw Buddy, whose growl had intensified into a snarl. The dog was staring directly at him, unblinking. The standoff lasted 5 long seconds. Finally, David cursed violently. He took a hasty step back. "Fine. Tear the damn place apart. You won't find anything." Eleanor touched his arm lightly, a gesture meant to look wifely and supportive. "It's all right, David," she said, her voice still calm. "I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding. We have nothing to hide." She offered the officers a faint, brittle smile. "Please, try not to make too much of a mess." Her performance was chilling. The polite, put-upon citizen. Ben gave a sharp nod. The team moved past him into the house. The interior was tidy, unnervingly so. The air smelled of lemon-scented cleaner and coffee. There were no pictures of Lily. As the officers spread out, Buddy strained forward, pulling Ben down the hallway. His nose was to the floor, then to the air. Sniffing urgently, he ignored the living room. The kitchen, pulling insistently toward a plain, painted door at the very end of the hall. It was locked with a heavy, new-looking deadbolt. Buddy stopped before it, his paws planted. He lowered his head, sniffed deeply along the crack at the bottom, let out a single, sharp, furious bark. He began to scratch at the wood, whining with high-pitched urgency. Ben's blood ran cold. He knew this behavior. This was his fine signal. The basement. From the living room, David shouted, "That's just a storage closet. There's nothing in there." His voice was too loud, too defensive. Eleanor was silent. Ben turned to Officer Garcia. "Get this open." Garcia stepped forward with a Halligan tool. He wedged the pry bar into the doorframe. The wood splintered with a loud crack. With a final, wrenching pull, the door swung inward. Darkness, and a smell. It wafted out. Damp earth, thick mildew, and underneath it, the stink of old blood. Buddy didn't hesitate. He surged into the darkness, his nails clicking on wooden steps, his barks echoing from below. Ben clicked on his heavy-duty flashlight. The beam cut a swath through the black. He looked back once, down the hall. David and Eleanor were standing together, watching. David's face was a mask of fury. Eleanor's composure seemed strained, a fine crack in her porcelain facade. Ben turned back to the ominous opening. "Let's see what they were hiding," he said to Detective Perez. He started down the stairs into the darkness, following the sound of his partner's barks. What waited beneath that floor would haunt them all. The wooden stairs groaned under their weight, a mournful sound that seemed to protest their intrusion into this hidden space. Ben descended first, his flashlight beam cutting a nervous path through the absolute blackness. The smell was overwhelming now, a thick, cloying mixture of wet earth, rotting wood, and the stink of old blood. It was a smell of neglect and of pain. Buddy was already at the bottom, a dark shape moving restlessly in the gloom, his whines echoing off the concrete walls. Ben reached the final step and swept his light around the room. The basement was a tomb. The walls were bare, stained concrete, weeping with moisture in the freezing air. The floor was hard-packed dirt, uneven and cold. A single bare low-wattage bulb hung from a wire in the center of the room, but Ben didn't bother looking for a switch. His flashlight was a more honest light. It showed things as they were without pity. The beam landed first on the far wall. Rusted chains were bolted to the concrete, ending in heavy, open cuffs. Ben's stomach lurched. Next to them, a frayed rope was tied in a complex, cruel knot. The sight alone made his breath catch. His light moved. A worn leather belt lay coiled on the dirt. Then, the beam caught a broken wooden chair in the corner. One of its legs was snapped clean off. The other 3 legs were scarred with deep gouges, as if someone had struggled violently against them. But it was a final sight that stole the air from Ben's lungs. Huddled against the wall was a small pile of clothing, a faded T-shirt with a cartoon kitten on it, so small it could only belong to a little girl, socks stiff and dark with dried blood, and a pair of tiny sneakers, the laces still tied, sitting forlornly as if waiting for feet that would never fill them again. "My God!" Detective Perez whispered from behind him, her voice thick with a revulsion that was both professional and deeply personal. Ben couldn't speak. His jaw was locked so tight it ached. The rage he'd been carefully controlling since the hospital now boiled up, a white-hot fire in his veins. This wasn't just evidence. It was a shrine to suffering. Every item was a word in the story Lily had tried to tell. It was a story of terror, of imprisonment, of brutal, repeated violence. The sterile medical report had been abstract. This was visceral. This was real. He forced himself to take a step forward, his boots sinking into the soft dirt. He crouched down, not touching anything, just looking at the small, blood-stained socks. He could almost see her here, shivering in the dark. The image was so vivid it was a physical pain in his chest. Above them, David Kane's voice roared, distorted by the floorboards. "You're twisting everything. She's a liar, a dramatic little liar." The sound of that voice, shouting lies in the comfort of the clean, bright house above this pit of despair, snapped something in Ben. He turned and took the stairs 2 at a time, emerging back into the hallway with a cold fury etched into every line of his face. Perez and Buddy were right behind him, the dog emitting a continuous, guttural growl directed at David. David stood in the living room, his face flushed, his hands still clenched. Eleanor was beside him, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Ben didn't shout. His voice was low, icy, and carried the full weight of the horror he had just witnessed. "We found the basement, David. The chains, the rope, the belt, the broken chair, her clothes." David's eyes bulged. "That's all junk. Old storage. Kids lie. She's always been a problem, making up stories for attention." It was then that Eleanor spoke, her voice surprisingly steady, but her eyes darting nervously toward Buddy. "Officer, Sophie has Lily, has always had a very active imagination. She said the corrected name as if it were a distasteful word. She tells tales. You can't possibly take the word of a frightened child over ours. The audacity of it, the cold, calculating denial in the face of such tangible proof, was breathtaking. It unsettled the other officers, who exchanged glances of disbelief. No one spoke for a long, hollow moment. Detective Perez had heard enough. She snapped a pair of cold, steel handcuffs from her belt. David Kane, you're under arrest for aggravated child abuse, unlawful imprisonment, and assault. Her voice was flat and final. She moved forward, seizing David's wrist. He resisted, his muscles coiling, his breath coming in hot, angry grunts. Get your hands off me. For a moment, it seemed a violent struggle was inevitable, but 3 officers converged, forcing him against the wall, pinning his arms behind his back. The click of the cuffs closing was a small, satisfying sound of justice beginning its work. Ben turned his gaze to Eleanor, who watched her husband being subdued. Her jaw twitched. And you, Ben said, his voice like shards of ice. You watched. You allowed this. You are complicit in every single thing we found down there. Her eyes flickered, but her tone remained unervingly calm. I did what I had to do to keep my family together. That girl, she exaggerates. She always has. It was the same lie, repeated like a mantra. Ben's hand tightened at his side, every instinct screaming to shout, to make her see. But he held his composure. The law was the tool, not his anger. It was Buddy who broke the standoff. The German shepherd took a single step forward, his growl deepening into a sound that was purely primal. He bared his teeth, his amber eyes locked on Eleanor. For the first time, her composure truly broke. She flinched, taking an involuntary step backward, her hand flying to her throat. The mask of the polite, misunderstood mother shattered, revealing the frightened woman beneath. Her hand trembled as she touched her neck. She was afraid of the dog. She was afraid of the raw, instinctual judgment he represented. The house, once a stage for their performance of normalcy, was now a crime scene. Its secrets had been dragged, kicking and screaming, into the light. As David was read his rights and led away, cursing and struggling, the only sound left was a low, steady rumble in Buddy's chest, a sound that seemed to say the hunt was not yet over. After David Kane had been hauled away in handcuffs, a different kind of silence descended upon the house on Elm Street. It was no longer quiet as secrets kept, but the raw, exposed silence of a wound freshly lanced. The air itself felt charged, thick with a residue of anger and unveiled horror. Officers moved through the rooms with a grim, methodical purpose, photographing, bagging, and labeling the evidence of a broken life. The basement remained the epicenter, but the search was far from over. Buddy prowled the main floor at Ben's side, his nails ticking a restless rhythm on the hardwood. The German shepherd was unsettled. He had done his job. He had found the girl. He had found the prison. But his instincts were still screaming. His amber eyes scanned every corner, his nose constantly twitching, sampling the air as if trying to catch the fading echo of a specific scent. He would pause, sniff deeply at a floorboard, then whine softly, looking up at Ben as if to say, "We're missing something." Ben trusted this behavior implicitly. Buddy wasn't just a tool. He was a partner with senses he couldn't hope to match. "Easy, boy," Ben murmured, his own senses heightened. "Show me what you've got." Buddy's focus shifted to a cluttered utility room off the kitchen. It was a space of dusty shelves stacked with old paint cans, coil garden hoses, and boxes of forgotten holiday decorations. The dog moved with renewed purpose, circling a lower shelf crammed with jars of nails and stacks of yellowing newspapers. He suddenly stopped, lowered his head, and began pawing insistently at the bottom shelf, his claws scraping against the particle board. A low, determined bark vibrated in his chest, a sound entirely different from his earlier alerts. This wasn't about a person or a place of confinement. This was about a thing, a secret. Detective Perez came to the doorway, her expression curious. "What's he got now?" Ben crouched beside his partner, his flashlight illuminating the dusty corner. Buddy shoved his snout against the seam where the shelf met the wall, whining with a high-pitched urgency that set Ben's nerves on edge. Ben pressed his palm against the wood panel at the back of the shelf and tapped it. The sound was hollow, a dead giveaway. "Help me move this," Ben ordered, his pulse quickening. Officer Garcia stepped forward. Together, they gripped the heavy shelving unit. With a grunt of effort, they heaved it sideways. The unit scraped loudly across the floor, revealing a gap in the wall behind it. A narrow, hidden compartment no larger than a shoebox. Buddy didn't wait for an invitation. He immediately nosed into the space and let out a sharp, triumphant bark. Ben reached into the darkness, his fingers brushing against something soft and worn. He pulled out a small composition notebook. Its cover was a faded blue, torn at one corner, and the edges of all the pages were curled and softened from handling. It felt fragile in his large hand. He knew what it was even before he opened it. His heart hammered against his ribs. Carefully, as if handling a holy relic, he flipped the cover. Inside the clumsy, looping handwriting, a little girl filled the lined pages. The letters were uneven, some pressed so hard they had nearly torn the paper. Words were misspelled. Sentences ran together, but the voice was unmistakably Lily's. It was a voice screaming into a void, preserving her truth in the only way she could. Ben's throat tightened as he began to read a random entry aloud, his voice low and rough, faltering on the words. October 12th. He locked me in the dark again. My stomach was making noises. I drew pictures of cake in the dirt with my finger. I heard a mouse. I wasn't so scared with the mouse there. He turned a few pages, the paper rustling softly in the silent room. November 3rd. The belt hurt today. I cried. Mom stood in the door. She had her smile. It's a scary smile. Another page, this one with a faint, brownish smudge in the corner. December 18th. I wish my real dad was here. He had a loud laugh. Maybe if he was here, he would hear me at night. Maybe someone would. Each entry was a punch to the gut, a date that matched a bruise, a description that matched an injury, a mention of the mother's smile that matched the betrayal in Lily's eyes. It was all here. This wasn't just a diary. It was a testament, written in the desperate hand of its only victim. Detective Perez leaned in, reading over his shoulder. "Dear God," she muttered, her voice thick with emotion she rarely showed. "This is it. This is everything. It's a confession written by the victim herself." Officer Garcia looked over, his young face pale. "She was building a case," he said softly. Without even knowing it, she was keeping proof. Ben closed the notebook carefully, his large hand wrapping around it as if it could shield the fragile pages from the world. He felt a profound, aching respect for the little girl who had found the courage to record her nightmare. "This goes straight to the evidence locker," he said, his tone leaving no room for debate. "No copies, no mistakes. This is her voice. And now it will be heard." He walked back into the living room where Eleanor Keller sat, stiff and silent, on the sofa. Her eyes lifted as Ben entered, and they zeroed in on a small, blue notebook in his hand. A flicker of something, fear, recognition, hatred, passed through her gaze before she veiled it again with cold indifference. "What is that?" she asked, her tone implying a mild annoyance. "It's a journal," Ben said, his voice cold as stone. "Your daughter's journal. She wrote down everything. Dates, what David did to her, what she felt. Every word matches the evidence we found." Eleanor's lips curved into that faint, dismissive smile that had haunted Lily. "She has quite the imagination. Always has. You can't take the scribblings of a disturbed child as fact." Detective Perez stepped in, her patience gone. "Don't insult our intelligence. The bruises on her body match the dates in this book. The broken rib, the malnourishment. This is an imagination, Mrs. Keller. This is a truth, written in your daughter's own hand, and it condemns you as much as it condemns your husband." Eleanor's expression didn't break. She folded her hands primly in her lap. She only wrote those things to get attention. She was jealous of the life David and I built. Children, they exaggerate. Her calm, repeated denial in the face of such raw, heartbreaking proof was monstrous. It was as if she lived in a different reality. It was Buddy who broke the spell. From Ben's side, the dog let out a deep, guttural growl. the sound rolling through the room like thunder. He took a single, deliberate step toward Eleanor, his eyes fixed on her with an unnerving intensity. For the first time, Eleanor's composure fully shattered. She flinched back into the sofa cushions, her hand flying to her chest, her eyes wide with genuine fear. The animal, the primal truth he represented, was something her lies could not penetrate. Ben held the journal tighter. Lily's voice, trembling and small, had been hidden in a wall. But now it was free, and it was stronger than any denial Eleanor Keller could muster. Her voice had been trapped in these walls. But not anymore. The small blue notebook felt like a live wire in Ben's hand, humming with the silent, desperate energy of a child's pain. It was more than evidence. It was a soul captured on paper. The confrontation in the living room had reached a stalemate, broken only by Buddy's guttural warning. Eleanor Keller had retreated behind a wall of cold denial, but the fear in her eyes when she looked at the dog was a crack in her armor. Ben held the journal up. This journal, along with the evidence from the basement and the medical report, is enough for your arrest, Mrs. Keller. Eleanor's head lifted, her chin tilting in defiance that now seemed fragile. Arrest me? For what? For my child's wild imagination. For criminal negligence and complicity to child abuse, Detective Perez stated, her voice flat and final. She already had a second pair of handcuffs in her hand. The metallic click as she prepared them was a sharp, definitive sound. The reality of the situation seemed to finally penetrate Eleanor's carefully constructed facade. The color drained from her face. Her eyes darted from the cuffs to Ben's stony expression, to the journal, and finally to Buddy, who still watched her with unwavering focus. You're making a terrible mistake, she said, but her voice had lost its steady, dismissive quality. It was thinner now, laced with panic. Everything I did for this family, to keep us together. That girl, she was tearing us apart with her lies and her neediness. Ben took a step forward, the journal held tightly in his grip. He didn't raise his voice, but each word was like a chip of ice. Lily wasn't tearing your family apart. She was a little girl who needed her mother, and you chose to stand by and watch while a monster broke her. You didn't just allow it. You endorsed it with your silence, with your smile. Hearing her own daughter's description of that smile thrown back at her was the final blow. Eleanor flinched as if she'd been struck. Her composure shattered completely. The poised, suburban wife vanished, replaced by a cornered, bitter woman. You don't understand, she snapped, her voice rising shrilly. You have no idea what it's like. David, he's not an easy man. He has expectations. It was her, or me. It was always her, or me. The confession, born of panic and self-preservation, hung in the air, more damning than any legal argument. She had admitted she had sacrificed her child to placate her husband. A profound silence fell over the room. The other officers stopped their work, the grim truth of her words settling over them. It's never a choice, Ben said, his voice low and filled with contempt he made no effort to hide. A mother's job is to protect her child. Always. You failed. Detective Perez moved in. Eleanor Keller, you have the right to remain silent. She began, reciting the Miranda rights. As the words washed over her, Eleanor seemed to shrink. The fight went out of her. She offered her wrists without resistance, her eyes fixed on the floor. The click of the handcuffs closing around her thin wrist was a soft, yet profound sound of justice being served. She was no longer a bystander. She was a perpetrator. As Perez guided her toward the door, Eleanor paused, turning her head to look one last time at the house, the clean, orderly house she had prioritized over her own child. Her expression was unreadable, a mixture of shame, fear, and perhaps a flicker of long-suppressed regret. Once she was led outside, the energy in the house shifted again. The search continued, but now with a sense of grim completion. The monsters had been identified and captured. Ben stood in the center of the living room, the journal still in his hand. He looked around at the neutral walls, the generic decor, the utter lack of any sign that a happy little girl had ever lived here. It was a house, not a home. It had been a prison. Officer Garcia approached him. "We've got everything tagged and bagged, Ben. The basement, the journal, the photos, it's all going to the DA. This is a rock-solid case. Ben nodded slowly. It has to be. There can't be any loopholes. Not for this. He looked down at the blue notebook. This is our most important piece of evidence. I'm going to hand-deliver it to the evidence locker myself. He walked outside into the cold, bright afternoon. The neighborhood was still quiet, but it felt different now. The hidden horror had been excised. 2 squad cars were pulling away, carrying David and Eleanor to the station for booking. Buddy walked beside him, his job done for now. The dog's intensity had eased, replaced by a calm, weary satisfaction. He leaned against Ben's leg for a moment, a brief gesture of solidarity, before jumping into the back of the patrol car. As Ben drove away from Elm Street, he felt the weight of the morning's events pressing down on him. But beneath the exhaustion and anger, there was a solid core of resolution. They had the evidence. They had the perpetrators in custody. The first, most brutal battle was over. Justice never feels enough, but it was a start. In the weeks that followed the raid on Elm Street, a fragile, newfound peace settled over Lily Keller's life. The constant, gnawing fear that had been her shadow began to recede, replaced by the slow, steady rhythm of safety. She was discharged from Riverton General Hospital into the temporary custody of social services, and from there, placed with a foster family in a quiet neighborhood on the other side of town. The Peterson family lived in a modest, 2-story house on a street named Willow Lane. The house was painted a soft, welcoming gray with bright white trim, and the front yard was a tangle of resilient shrubs and a large, old oak tree whose branches seemed to offer a protective embrace. Inside, the air smelled of baked goods and lemon polish, and the walls were covered in a cheerful clutter of family photos, children's drawings, and slightly crooked shelves holding well-loved books. For Lily, whose world had been comprised of cold hardwood floors and a dark basement, the Peterson home felt like stepping into a dream. Her foster mother, Clara Peterson, was a warm, sturdy woman in her late 40s with kind brown eyes and a cloud of curly, graying hair that she rarely managed to fully tame. She worked as a kindergarten teacher, and her voice naturally carried a gentle, sing-song quality that could soothe even the most anxious heart. Her husband, Robert, was a quiet, solid man in his early 50s, a carpenter with large, capable hands that were always nicked and calloused, but impossibly gentle when he handed Lily a cup of hot chocolate or fixed a loose hinge on her bedroom door. He spoke less than Clara, but his presence was a constant, reassuring hum in the background of the house. They had been foster parents for nearly a decade, specializing in children who needed extra patience and care. When they first met Lily at the social services office, she was a silent, watchful ghost of a child, her shoulders hunched, her eyes darting towards every exit. Clara didn't try to hug her. She simply knelt down, smiled, and said, "Hello, Lily. We've been waiting to meet you. Your room has a window that looks out at the oak tree. Sometimes blue jays visit in the morning." That small, specific detail, the blue jays, had been the first key. It was a promise of normal, gentle things. The first few days at the Petersons were a delicate dance. Lily moved through the house like a little ghost, barely speaking, jumping at sudden noises. She ate the meals Clara prepared with a quiet intensity, as if expecting the food to be taken away at any moment. At night, the shadows in her new room would transform into the looming shape of David, and she would wake up screaming, her body drenched in a cold sweat. But the Petersons were prepared. Clara would sit with her, reading stories in her soft, steady voice until the tremor subsided. Robert, on more than one occasion, was found sitting on the floor in the hallway outside her room, a silent, vigilant guardian until she fell back asleep. And then there was Buddy. Officer Ben Evans visited as often as his duties allowed, and every time Buddy was with him. The moment the patrol car pulled up, the German shepherd would whine with excitement. And the second Ben opened the door, he would bound toward the house, his tail a frantic, joyful metronome. For Lily, these visits were the highlights of her new life. She would wait by the window, her face pressed to glass, and when she saw him, a true, unforced smile would break through, a sight that never failed to tighten Ben's throat with emotion. In the Peterson sprawling fence backyard, Lily and Buddy would play. She would run, her laughter, a sound that was still rare and precious, ringing out across the lawn as Buddy thundered after her, playfully barking, his powerful body moving with a joyful grace. He would let her chase him, then dramatically flop onto grass, rolling onto his back so she could rub his belly. In these moments, the frail, terrified girl from the alley was gone. In her place was a child, simply playing with her dog. One such afternoon, Ben stood on the back porch with Claire and Robert, watching them. The golden light of the setting sun painted the yard in warm hues. "She's doing better," Clara said, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and pride. She talked about her favorite color at dinner last night. "It's purple." Such a small thing, but it felt like a victory. Ben nodded, a faint smile touching his own lips. "She's stronger than anyone knows." Robert crossed his arms, his gaze thoughtful as he watched Lily carefully braid dandelions into Buddy's fur. "That dog, he's her anchor. He broke through the fear faster than we ever could. She trusts him completely." "He's not going anywhere," Ben said, his voice firm. "He made his choice the night he found her. He's hers as much as he's mine." As twilight began to settle, Lily came and sat on the porch steps, leaning her small body against Buddy's solid warmth. Ben sat down beside her. "The trial, it's going to start soon, Lily," he said gently, broaching the subject he'd been dreading. "A judge and some other people are going to need to hear what happened. I'll be there with you. So will Buddy if they allow it." Lily's smile faded. Her hand, which had been stroking Buddy's fur, froze mid-pet. She looked down at her shoes. "Will I have to see them?" she whispered. "You might," Ben said honestly, "but they will be in a special place in the courtroom and they can't hurt you. They can't come near you. I will be right there. The whole point is to make sure they can never hurt you or anyone else ever again." She was silent for a long time, digesting this. Buddy nudged her still hand with his wet nose, and she wrapped her arms around his neck. "Okay," she said, her voice small but clear. "I'll be brave." "You already are the bravest person I know," Ben said, and he meant it. Later, as Ben prepared to leave, Lily stood by the front door, clutching a drawing she'd made for him, a stick-figure drawing of her, Buddy, and Ben, all holding hands under a large, smiling sun. "Thank you," she said, her blue eyes serious, "for finding me." Ben crouched down, so he was at her eye level. "Thank you," he replied, his voice soft, "for being so strong." As he drove away, the drawing on the passenger seat, he felt the weight of the approaching trial settle on his shoulders. This peaceful interlude, this calm in the Petersons' loving home, was the eye of a storm. The legal battle ahead would be brutal. The courtroom would ask her to relive everything. But he looked at the simple, hopeful drawing and then at the reflection of his loyal partner in the rearview mirror, and he knew they had everything they needed to fight. They had the truth, and they had each other. The Lynn County Courthouse was a formidable building of aged stone and stern architecture. On this crisp, clear morning, it felt especially imposing. Inside, the air was cool and still, carrying a faint scent of old wood and a palpable, nervous tension. The hallway outside the courtroom was a river of somber suits and low murmurs. Lily Keller, dressed in a simple, dark blue dress, felt impossibly small. Her hand was tucked firmly inside Ben Evans's large, reassuring one. He was in his full dress uniform. At his other side, Buddy walked, his harness strapped securely. The German shepherd seemed to sense the gravity of the occasion. He moved with a calm, dignified purpose. They entered the courtroom. It was a vast, wood-paneled space that seemed to swallow sound. Lily's eyes were immediately drawn to the front of the room. There, at one table, sat David and Eleanor Kane. David looked smaller in a cheap, ill-fitting suit. His usual aggression was compressed into a sullen glare. Eleanor, in a plain beige blouse, sat perfectly straight. She did not look at Lily. She stared straight ahead, her expression a mask of detached indifference. A gentle pressure on her hand made Lily look up at Ben. He gave her a small, steady nod. "You are safe," his eyes said. Buddy leaned his warm weight against her leg, a silent, furry pillar of support. The bailiff's voice boomed, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Elizabeth Moreno." The courtroom shuffled to its feet. Judge Moreno was a woman in her 60s with severe, intelligent face and sharp eyes behind her glasses. Her silver hair was swept back into a tight bun. She carried an aura of absolute authority, but her gaze, when it briefly fell upon Lily, held a flicker of something softer. The prosecutor, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, began her opening statement. She was young, with fiery red hair and a determined set to her jaw. She laid out the case with clear, brutal precision. The systematic abuse, the imprisonment, the medical evidence, the mother's complicity. She spoke of a little girl's journal. Lily listened, her heart thudding against her ribs, each word pulling her back into the cold house on Elm Street. Then it was time. The prosecution calls Lily Keller to the stand. The words echoed in the silent room. Lily's breath hitched. Ben gave her hand one final, firm squeeze before letting go. Buddy let out a soft, encouraging whine. Walking to the witness stand felt like the longest journey of her life. The bailiff, a large man with a kind face, helped her into the tall chair. She felt 1,000 eyes on her, but she kept her own gaze fixed on Ben and Buddy. Sarah Jenkins approached the stand, her demeanor shifting from fierce advocate to gentle interviewer. She smiled warmly. "Lily, I know this is very scary, but you're being so brave. Can you tell the court, in your own words, what your life was like living with David and Eleanor Kane?" Lily's throat felt tight and dry. She looked at David, whose cold eyes were fixed on her, and a tremor of fear ran through her. But then she saw Buddy. The dog was sitting alert, his ears pricked, his gaze locked on her. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible wag of his tail. It was enough. Her voice, when it came, was a fragile whisper, amplified by the microphone into a soft tremor that filled the room. He hurt me," she began, her eyes dropping to her lap. "David, he hit me with his hands. And his boots. Sometimes with a belt." She described the basement then, the cold, the darkness, the chains. She spoke of the hunger. Her voice grew a little stronger. "And my mom." She just stood there. She watched. Lily took a shaky breath. The courtroom was utterly silent. She smiled. A collective, sharp intake of breath rustled through the courtroom. The words, spoken in her small, clear voice, were more powerful than any lawyer's argument. Some of the jurors looked down. The court reporter's fingers flew over her machine. Sarah Jenkins's voice was soft. "Lily, did you ever write about what was happening to you?" Lily nodded. "In my notebook. I hid it. I thought, if someone ever found it, they would believe me." The prosecutor lifted the clear evidence bag containing the blue journal. "Is this your notebook?" "Yes," Lily whispered. "That's mine." The journal was entered into evidence. Its presence felt like a ghost had taken a stand. "Thank you, Lily," Sarah Jenkins said, her voice thick with emotion. No further questions. As Lily stepped down from the stand, she didn't look at her mother or David. She walked straight back to her seat, and the moment she was within reach, she buried her face in Buddy's thick fur, her small body trembling. The dog lowered his head, nuzzling her gently. She had done it. She had faced her monsters and told her story. But as she sat there, she saw a man in a dark suit stand up from the defense table. It was David's lawyer. He adjusted his tie with a sharp tug, and he was walking toward her. The hardest part was not over yet. The man approaching the witness stand was David Kane's defense attorney, Mr. Arnold Finch. He was a middle-aged man with thinning, slick-back hair and an expensive suit. He moved with a slow, deliberate pace, but his eyes were sharp. He stopped a respectful distance from Lily, but his presence felt invasive. Lily, who had just begun to relax against Buddy, immediately stiffened, her fingers clutching the dog's fur again. Ben leaned forward slightly, a silent signal of his vigilance. "Your Honor," Sarah Jenkins said, a note of protective warning in her voice, "given the witness's age, I ask that counsel keep his questions brief and non-confrontational." Judge Moreno adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Finch, you'll proceed with sensitivity." "Of course, Your Honor," Finch said, offering a thin smile. He turned to Lily. "Lily, you're a very imaginative girl, aren't you? You like to tell stories." "Sometimes. Children your age have a hard time telling the difference between stories and real life. Isn't that true?" The insinuation hung in the air, oily and manipulative. He was trying to plant the seed of doubt that Eleanor had tried to cultivate. Lily's brow furrowed. She looked from the lawyer to Ben, then down at Buddy. The dog let out a low, soft growl, barely audible, but it vibrated through her hands. She lifted her chin, her gray eyes losing their clouded fear and gaining a sudden, sharp clarity. I don't lie. She let the words hang in the quiet courtroom. I wrote what happened, so I wouldn't forget, so someone would know. Finch's smile tightened. But children often exaggerate, don't they? To get attention? Perhaps you felt you weren't getting enough attention. I didn't want their attention, Lily replied, her words clear and cutting. I wanted them to leave me alone. Every word in my book is true, and Officer Evans and Buddy believe me. She looked directly at the jury as she said this. They found me. They listened. One of the jurors, a man, cleared his throat. A woman looked away, blinking rapidly. Her simple, powerful statement turned the lawyer's entire line of questioning on its head. She wasn't arguing with him. She was stating a fact. Finch faltered. He had gotten nothing from her but a reinforced image of integrity. No further questions, he said curtly, returning to his seat. The defense for Eleanor Kane, a severe woman named Ms. Walsh, declined to cross-examine. It was a tactical retreat. With Lily's testimony complete, the rest of the trial unfolded with a grim, inevitable momentum. Sarah Jenkins entered the journal into evidence, and passages were read aloud. The medical report was presented. Photographs of the basement were displayed, drawing gasps from the jury. The defense called no witnesses. Their entire case rested on trying to poke holes, but the narrative was a fortress. Finally, it was time for closing arguments. Sarah Jenkins stood before the jury. Members of the jury, she began, what you have heard is not a story. It is a record of torture written in bruises, in a broken rib, in the eyes of malnutrition. It is a record of betrayal written by a little girl in a hidden notebook. David Kane wielded the fists and the boots. Eleanor Kane wielded something just as cruel, her silence, her smile. She had a sacred duty to protect her child, and she traded that duty for peace with a monster. Find them guilty. Give Lily Keller the safety and justice she deserves. The defense's arguments sounded weak and hollow in comparison. Judge Moreno gave the jury their instructions, and they filed out to deliberate. The wait began. Ben, Lily, and the Petersons sat in a quiet room. No one spoke much. Lily sat on the floor with Buddy, her head resting on his side, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Clara held Robert's hand tightly. Ben paced. After what felt like an eternity, a bailiff came to the door. The jury has reached a verdict. The courtroom reassembled in a tense silence. David and Eleanor were brought back in. David's arrogant glare was gone, replaced by pale anxiety. Eleanor's mask was firmly back, but her hands were white-knuckled. The jury foreman, a grave-faced man, stood. On the count of aggravated child abuse, how do you find defendant David Kane? Guilty. A sob escaped Clara Peterson. Ben closed his eyes for a second, a wave of relief so powerful it left him lightheaded. The foreman continued. Unlawful imprisonment. Assault. Each guilty was a hammer strike. Then he turned to Eleanor. On the count of criminal negligence and complicity to aggravated child abuse, how do you find a defendant, Eleanor Kane? The pause was infinitesimal. Guilty. The gavel fell. It was over. Lily buried her face in Buddy's fur, her small body trembling with release. For the first time, justice didn't sound like silence. The single, sharp crack of Judge Moreno's gavel was a period at the end of a long, painful sentence. In the moment of silence that followed, the word guilty seemed to echo, its meaning settling over the courtroom in layers. For David and Eleanor Kane, it was a condemnation. For the police and prosecutors, it was a validation. For Ben Evans and the Petersons, it was a profound relief. And for Lily, it was something even more fundamental. It was belief made official by the world. A low, collective exhale passed through the room, followed by the immediate, bustling activity of the court. Officers moved in to take David and Eleanor into custody. David's sullen defiance had crumbled into a stunned, ashen-faced silence. As he was led away, he didn't look at Lily, his gaze fixed on the floor. Eleanor's exit was different. As the bailiff approached her, her composure finally shattered completely. The mask of detached indifference fell away, revealing a face twisted with sudden, bitter realization. She turned, her eyes finding her daughter. The look she gave Lily was not one of apology, but of pure accusation. But before the venom could settle, Buddy let out a low, warning growl that drew her terrified gaze away. She was let out without another word, her head finally bowed. The formal sentencing hearing took place 2 weeks later. The atmosphere was more solemn than tense. Sarah Jenkins presented a victim impact statement on Lily's behalf, speaking of the night terrors, the deep-seated fear, the long road of healing. It gave a voice to the invisible wounds. When Judge Moreno spoke, her voice was grave. She looked first at David Kane. David Kane, the evidence presented in this court painted a picture of sustained, calculated cruelty. You systematically tortured a vulnerable child. You broke her bones and you tried to break her spirit. The court sentences you to 25 years for aggravated child abuse, with consecutive sentences for unlawful imprisonment and assault, for a total of 40 years. You will be eligible for parole only after serving a minimum of 30 years. The numbers hung in the air, vast and final. David flinched as if struck. The judge then turned her stern gaze to Eleanor Keller. Your crime is, in some ways, more insidious. You were given the sacred trust of motherhood, and you betrayed it. You were not the one wielding the belt, but your silent complicity made the abuse possible. The court sentences you to 15 years in prison. Furthermore, you are hereby stripped of all parental rights to Lily Keller permanently. Eleanor showed no reaction. It was the ultimate rejection. As the gavel fell for final time, a definitive silence descended. It was over, truly over. Outside the courthouse, the sun was shining. Ben, Lily, and the Petersons stood together on the massive stone steps. Lily was holding Clara's hand, with Buddy pressed close against her other side. She looked up at the sky, then at the people around her. "It's really done?" she asked, her voice small. "It's really done," Ben confirmed, crouching down to her level. "They can't hurt you ever again. The law has spoken, and it believed you." A single tear traced a clean path down Lily's cheek, but it was not a tear of sadness. It was a tear of release. She threw her arms around Buddy's neck, burying her face in his fur. "We did it, Buddy," she whispered. "We did it." The German shepherd wagged his tail, licking her cheek. In the weeks that followed, a new chapter began. With the trial concluded and parental rights terminated, the adoption process initiated by Clara and Robert Peterson moved forward. It was no longer a foster placement. It was becoming a forever family. Life on Willow Lane settled into a deeper, more secure rhythm. Lily's night terrors became less frequent. She started to laugh more easily. She began to call Clara Mom and Robert Dad. The words tentative at first, then growing with confidence. She enrolled in a new school where she slowly made friends. Ben Evans remained a constant presence. His visits were no longer about a pending case, but about friendship and family. He and Robert would talk in the living room while Clara baked, and Lily would do her homework at the kitchen table with Buddy snoozing at her feet. The grief he had carried for his late wife was still there, but it was no longer a crushing weight. One evening, as Ben was preparing to leave, Lily ran up to him and handed him a new drawing. It showed a house with a smiling sun above it. In front stood 4 stick figures, one tall with a police hat, Ben, one with a wooden hammer, Robert, one with curly hair, Clara, and a small one with a yellow dress, herself. And at their feet, a brown dog with a wagging tail. Underneath, she had written, "My family." Ben felt a lump form in his throat. He carefully folded the drawing and placed it in his inside pocket, right over his heart. "I'll treasure this," he said, his voice rough with emotion. As he drove away from the warm glow of the Peterson house, he didn't feel the weight of the world. He felt light. The monster was in a cage. The collaborator was silenced. And the little girl was safe, loved, and finally, truly home. Sunlight streamed through the car window, warm and peaceful on his face. Time, which had once dragged for Lily in the dark silence of the basement, now seemed to flow with the gentle, swift current of a peaceful river. Seasons turned on Willow Lane. The deep snows of that terrible winter gave way to a spring bursting with crocuses and daffodils, which in turn melted into long, golden days of summer. With each passing month, the shadows of the past receded a little more, not forgotten, but soothed by the consistent, loving presence of her new life. The adoption was finalized in a quiet, joyful ceremony at the family courthouse. Judge Moreno herself presided, her severe features softened by a genuine smile. When she officially declared Lily a permanent member of the Peterson family, Clara burst into happy tears, and Robert, the strong, silent carpenter, had to vigorously wipe his eyes. Lily, holding the official certificate in her hands, felt a final, internal lock click shut. She belonged. It was written on paper, but more importantly, it was written on her heart. The Peterson home was now unquestionably her home. Her room was no longer a guest room, but a reflection of her. Posters of horses on the walls, a growing collection of books, and a purple quilt on the bed. She had chores, like setting the table and feeding the goldfish, and she did them with a pride that came from being part of a real, functioning family. She still had bad dreams sometimes, moments where a raised voice would make her flinch. But now, when she woke up scared, Clara or Robert was there in an instant, and the fear would soon dissolve in the safety of their embrace. And there was always Buddy. Ben Evans's visits were a weekly highlight. The moment his car turned onto their street, Lily would race to the front door, Buddy barking excitedly beside her. The bond between the girl and the dog was a living, breathing thing. They understood each other in a language beyond words. Buddy was her playmate, her confidant, her furry, four-legged security blanket. He was a living reminder that even in the darkest night, help could come on four paws. One such afternoon, at the very end of summer, they were all in the backyard. The air was warm and carried the scent of cut grass. Lily, now with a healthy tan and stronger limbs, was playing fetch with Buddy. She threw a bright orange ball, and the dog shot after it, a blur of powerful motion and joy, returning it to her with a panting, doggy grin. Ben watched from the porch, a glass of iced tea in his hand. He looked at the scene, Lily's unrestrained laughter, Clara deadheading flowers and sun hat, Robert flipping burgers on the grill, and felt a peace so profound it was almost unfamiliar. The ghost of his wife, Sarah, no longer felt like a pain to be carried, but a gentle memory to be honored. In this new family, he had found a place to channel his protective love. She's a different kid, Robert said, coming to stand beside him. She's the kid she was always supposed to be, Ben replied softly. You and Clara, you gave that to her. We all did, Robert said, clapping Ben on the shoulder. You and that hero dog of yours most of all. As twilight began to paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Lily came and sat on the porch steps between Ben and Buddy, leaning her head against the dog's side. The sound of the neighborhood were the sounds of contentment. Children being called in for dinner, the distant hum of a lawnmower, the chirping of crickets. School starts again next week, Lily said, a note of excitement in her voice. I'm in Ms. Henderson's class. She has a guinea pig. That's great, kiddo, Ben said, smiling. She was quiet for a moment, watching the fireflies begin their flickering dance over the lawn. I don't think about them much anymore, she said, her voice quiet but clear. She didn't need to say their names. Sometimes I get scared that I'll forget what happened, and that it might happen again. Ben set down his glass and turned to face her fully. Lily, look at me. Her wide blue eyes met his. You will never forget. And that's okay. Those memories are a part of you, and they're what made you so strong. But they are not your future. Your future is here. It's school and guinea pigs and birthdays and growing up safe and loved. What happened to you will never, ever happen again. That is a promise from me, from your mom and dad, and from Buddy. As if on cue, Buddy let out a soft woof and nudged her hand with his wet nose, his tail thumping against a wooden step. A final, visible weight seemed to lift from Lily's small shoulders. She smiled, a full, radiant smile that reached her eyes and lit up her whole face. It was the smile of a child who was truly, completely safe. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder and lightning. They don't part seas or move mountains. Sometimes, they are quieter. They arrive in the steady crunch of boots on a snowy night, in the warm nudge of a dog's nose, in the kindness of strangers who become family. Lily's rescue was not just about justice. It was a testament to the fact that even in the deepest darkness, light can find a way in. If this story of hope and healing touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded that there is always hope. Leave a comment below about the power of second chances. And subscribe to our channel Bonds Unspoken so more voices, like Lily's, can be heard and more stories of courage can be told. May you and your family be blessed, kept safe, strong, and surrounded by love, today and always.